right, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Erin, Tricycle's marketing manager, and I'm pleased to be here with you today for our live panel discussion offered as part of the Tricycle Film Festival. We're joined today by Ed Bastian, director of the Dalai Lama's Gift, and scholars José Ignacio Cabezón, Roger Jackson, and Vesna Wallace, who will discuss the film and the Kalachakra. We hope you've all had a chance to watch the film by now. So a few notes before we begin. We'll be leaving time for questions at the end of the session. So please drop your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can start dropping those in at any time, and then I'll be reading those aloud when it's time for audience questions. Today's event will be recorded, and we'll share the replay link in a follow-up email. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our guest today. Dr. Ed Bastian holds a PhD in Buddhist studies and lived for years in Tibetan Buddhist monasteries in India. Classically trained by renowned teachers, he has translated Buddhist texts from Tibetan and Sanskrit and has produced several films on Tibetan Buddhism, including the Dalai Lama's Gift. He is an award-winning author and the founder of the Spiritual Paths Foundation. José Ignacio Cabezón is Dalai Lama Professor Emeritus and Distinguished Research Professor of Religious Studies at UC Santa Barbara. He is also President Emeritus of the American Academy of Religion and a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. His most recent books include Sera Monastery with Penpa Dorji and Sexuality in Classical South Asian Buddhism, both published by Wisdom Publications. Roger Jackson is Professor Emeritus of Asian Studies and Religion at Carleton College, where he taught the religions of South Asia and Tibet for nearly 3 decades. His scholarly interests include Indic and Tibetan Buddhist systems of philosophy, meditation, and ritual, Buddhist religious poetry, the study of mysticism, religion in Sri Lanka, and the contours of modern Buddhist thought. He is the author of many books, most recently Saraha, Poet of Blissful Awareness, and Rebirth, A Guide to Mind, Karma, and Cosmos in the Buddhist World. And finally, Vesna Wallace is Distinguished Professor of South Asian and Inner Asian Buddhist Traditions in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where she teaches courses on Indian Buddhism, Mongolian Buddhism, and Advanced Sanskrit. She has authored 8 books and numerous articles and chapters on Indian and Mongolian Buddhist traditions. She is also an affiliate faculty in the Translation Studies program and in the Medical Humanities and Disabilities program at UCSB. So welcome, Ed, Jose, Roger, and Vesna. Thank you all for joining us. Ed, I'll turn it over to you now to get us started. Can you tell us a little bit about when and why you began working on this film?
Well, thank you. And thank you so much, Erin, and thanks so much to Tricycle for putting on this incredible festival in general and for inviting us to do the panel. And just to give you a little bit of a background, Geshe Sopa, who I think almost probably everybody who's tuned in would know the name Geshe Sopa, was one of the great teachers of Tibetan Buddhism of our time. He had invited the Dalai Lama to do the Kalachakra initiation. And here we are in the middle of Wisconsin, Geshe Sopa with a piece of property that he recently acquired to create a Tibetan Buddhist monastery and a Buddhist center for study and for practice. And he invited the Dalai Lama to do something that had not ever been done outside of Tibet or India or Mongolia or those places, but had never been done in the so-called Western world. So the Dalai Lama, which is an interesting story in and of itself, posed the question to his advisors and got the answer that yes, we should do that with Geshe Sopa in Wisconsin. So once we knew it was happening, all the students of Geshe Sopa had to really devote themselves to creating a temple, to creating this incredible festival around everybody. So it was like an amazing, huge effort on everybody's part. He asked Sharpa Tuku, who is a great translator of Tibetan into English and teacher himself, and I to document it. Sharpa and I had just been doing a film up in Ladakh on Buddhism in Ladakh, and so we said, yes, we'd love to do that, and we'll do it to sort of in service to Geshe Sopa and to everybody who was there. So we shot the film with some help from Wisconsin Public Television, and we had it all in the can, as they say. And but the funds for the film were not coming to finish it up. So coincidentally, I was just beginning my career at the Smithsonian Institution as well as being a filmmaker, and I was able to put all the footage into the archives of the Smithsonian Institution, where they could be kept safe. And so there they stayed for over 40 years until 2016, when Catherine Weiler, my co-producer, and I decided we need to regenerate some energy around this film and get it done. Then in 2023, we were able then to digitize all the footage, just tens of hours of film that we had shot. And so with that, we hired a wonderful editor. And, most of you would know, looking at documentary films, they're often really made by the quality of the editor. And our editor, Jen Beeman, was fantastic and really created a storyline out of the people's involvement in it, not on somebody doing like kind of like a narration, but it's all based on the experiences of people who were there in the film. So it's been a great honor, great privilege, challenge for me then to learn a lot more about Kalachakra than I knew before. Luckily, we didn't have the money to finish it back when we stopped the shooting, because I didn't really understand Tantra. I didn't really understand what happened with the Kalachakra. So that gave me 40 years to bone up and get ready to actually do a film on the subject. Not that I became an expert, but perhaps just good enough to tell a story. So that's just a kind of a very brief overview of what we went through in order to create the film. So I think as we now move in, we have sort of a general, what you'll see here amongst us, and there's Jose, there's Roger, there's Vesna, there's myself, and all really good friends, scholars, but also good friends. So we're looking at this as a kind of a conversation between us, as an opportunity to talk about, the history. How did the Kalachakra even come into being in India back in the day? And what was its meaning of the Kalachakra and its purpose? And then and that would be predominantly sort of led by Vesna. Then we'll be moving into what's happening with Kalachakra today, both in America and around the world. The Roger's going to weigh in and then invite the comments of our colleagues to talk about it. And then Jose is going to talk a little bit to lead off about what is Tantra, what is Sutra, what's different between the regular Buddhism that we know about and Tantra, and how do we look at the Kalachakra as an example of Tantra? And so he can help us on that level get that kind of background. And then we'll be talking a little bit, what did it mean to each of us, the Kalachakra itself, going to the initiation? What was its impact on us as individuals, human beings, not just as scholars? So having said all that, thank you. Vesna, if you could please lead off, and just beginning with an overview of Kalachakra itself.
Sure. Yeah, it will have to be very short because we have a short time, but thank you for including me into this wonderful project. I myself learned from the film as well. So according to the tradition itself, it is said that Kalachakra was taught by the Buddha Shakyamuni in Thanyakataka Stupa, which was a very important Mahayana and Vajrayana site. When you look in a Tantra, you can see it was more of a visionary experience because Buddha appears on this divine lotus and so on. And just like in Mahayana Sutras, we oftentimes see these visionary experiences. But it is said that Buddha taught it there in this Thanyakataka Stupa, which is located in a village of Amaravati in southern India, now known as Andhra Pradesh. And then it is said that those who have received teachings and initiation felt it was not the proper time to keep it in India, but it had to be taken to the place called Shambhala, place that was created by the mind of Vajrapani, who was the preserver of Mahayana and Vajrayana teachings, and that it is to be brought to India at the time when time is ready. And so, according to the Stainless Light commentary, we see that Kalachakra was brought in 1027 in 11th century India, at a time when already Buddhism is pretty much monastic Buddhism, institutional Buddhism is slowly disappearing or weakening at a time when already danger from certain invasions and destruction of Buddhism was threatened, and there was a need for unification of different social classes, of different religious tradition, because this is what we get a sense also in not only in Kalachakra Tantra, but also in other Tantra. In order to practice a Tantra and to achieve the state of non-dual awareness, which is a Buddha's awareness, one needs to overcome any conception and misconceptions in terms and dualistic ways of thinking, in terms of which class is higher, which not, which, who is an outcast, who is not, what kind of dietary practices are assigned to different classes, what is a pure food, what's not a pure food, right? That all of these distinctions that divide the society have to be overcome, so that one starts there where one is, right? With one's own life, with one's own surrounding. And in order to be able to genuinely practice and progress along the path of Kalachakra to this non-dual knowledge, and not be trapped in a world of samsara, which is a dualistic view. So that is like in a nutshell, a little bit about the history of Kalachakra Tantra. And we know that Kalachakra Tantra, there are some evidence that it was practiced until the 15th century in South Asia. And then it was, but before that already, it was transferred to Tibet, and then later in the 14th century to Mongolia. And where it has been also very influential, and where both scholars and yogis of Tibet and Mongolia produced numerous commentaries on the Kalachakra Tantra.
So Roger, would you like to kind of take up where Vesna sort of left off? And of course, Jose, if you have comments as we move along, that would be really welcome too. But Roger, please.
Yeah, I'll sort of pick up with more or less where Vesna left off, and mention that throughout the Tibetan tradition, from pretty much the 11th, 12th century on, Kalachakra was a part of the. It was one of the most important tantric traditions recognized in virtually all of the Tibetan schools. As the people in the audience will know, there are multiple traditions in Tibetan Buddhism, multiple orders, including the Nyingma, the Kagyu, the Geluk, the Sakya, and so forth. And the Kalachakra was recognized by all of these schools and practiced by at least some people in all of these schools. But it's important, I think Vesna began to give us a good sense of how complex the Kalachakra is. It covers not just inner yogic practices, not just non-dual realizations, but all sorts of descriptions of outer events, even historical and political events. It's got medical and astrological aspects to it. It's probably the most well, one could argue about these things endlessly, but it might be the most complicated spiritual system ever developed anywhere. I'm sure the Kabbalists would argue that point, and we don't need to get into that. But it's an exceedingly sophisticated and complex system, and yet it persisted, at least in some quarters, throughout the history of pre-modern Tibetan Buddhism. When we get to the modern era, and come down to Tibet's sort of forcible introduction to the modern world at the hands of the Chinese in the 1950s. The tradition had already become established, among other places in Tibet, at Namgyal Monastery, which is a sort of private monastery affiliated with the Dalai Lamas and the monks at Namgyal Monastery. And these were the monks who eventually performed, who did most of the rituals around the Kalachakra in Madison and elsewhere. The Namgyal monks specialized in Kalachakra above all other tantras. And it's interesting that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has performed the Kalachakra, according to the website that I checked, a total of 34 times, with the first two actually being in Tibet in 1954 and 1956, respectively, at Norbulinka, which was his summer palace in the capital city of Lhasa. Every other Kalachakra since then dates from after 1959, when, of course, he went into exile in India. So it's interesting to me that one of the ironies of this is that, as I suggested, and I think Vesna was hinting at this as well, the Kalachakra is an extremely complicated, extremely esoteric system. I mean, tantras to begin with, and Jose will probably say more about this, but tantras are themselves esoteric practices and traditions within the larger scope of Buddhism, and the Kalachakra is arguably the most esoteric of all. And yet, starting in 1954, is still in Tibet, His Holiness decided, and I'm not sure that there was much of a tradition of this before, I don't know for sure, but he offered a Kalachakra initiation, which covers many days, as a large public event. And according to the website connected to His Holiness, there were 100,000 people at Norbulinka in Lhasa for that very first public Kalachakra. And so there's this interesting kind of tension between the highly esoteric, highly complicated nature of the Tantra and the practice of the Tantra, and the fact that it's given in these large public settings. And I found, I just want to read a very short paragraph from a book that His Holiness published quite recently on Vajrayana Buddhism, along with Venerable Thupten Chodron, where he says something about this tension that I'm talking about. He says, when I offer the Kalachakra empowerment, which is usually given to a large group, my basic aim is not the empowerment itself, but the opportunity to explain the fundamentals of the Buddhist path and the way to develop a kind heart to a large group of people. Many people come, but only those with the proper preparation can be said to have received the empowerment. Meanwhile, the majority of the audience remains peaceful for those days and hears teachings about love, compassion, and wisdom. If, as a result, people develop an appreciation of the kind heart, the event has been worthwhile. So I think this is a wonderful encapsulation of His Holiness's motives for teaching the Kalachakra in these large public settings, because he uses the occasion as a way of introducing people to Buddhist ideas, Buddhist practices, and then, maybe only a very few people in any audience can fully appreciate and kind of receive the initiation. But for everybody else, it's educational, and it may be considered a blessing as well. So again, within the compass of Tibetan Buddhism, the Kalachakra is not something that you actually find practice as much as you might expect, in spite of the importance of it as a public event that the Dalai Lama has held 34 different times. But this emphasis on the connection between teaching the Kalachakra and the generation of positive values, of virtues, if you will, and more broadly of something resembling world peace, becomes all part of what is done here. I mean, I'll turn it over to Jose in a second, and just one. It's not exactly anecdotal, but I helped advise Ed now and again on the film, as did everybody else here. And one of the things that I know Ed in particular kept coming up against is that every Tibetan, almost every Tibetan Lama he would talk to say, "Oh, I kind of know about Tantra, but I really don't know about Kalachakra." So it remains, even within the compass of Tibetan Buddhism, something that's highly specialized, and yet more people undoubtedly have received in some sense the Kalachakra initiation than any tantric initiation out there. I'll leave that at that then.
Well, thank you, Roger, so much. And yeah, Jose, would you jump in, please? And
Yeah.
and, before you start, I just want to say to our audience, please begin doing. If you have any questions that are beginning to come to you, just go to the Q&A part, of the site, and just start putting them in, because then really, well, those of you who have been teachers know this. The quality of your teaching also relies on the quality of the questions. So we're really hoping for your questions, because it'll enrich the experience and it'll push us to say things that are meaningful to you. So please engage in the questions as you're hearing how Jose now and the rest of us as we go along. Jose.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Ed, for organizing this, and thank you for the film. I watched it just a couple of days ago, and I think it was a real experience. And it was nostalgic for me, having been at that Kalachakra, but I can see the value of the film for introducing people to the Kalachakra in general, and to that event in the history of American Buddhism in particular. So thank you. Roger, it occurs to me from something that you said that that there had been previous large empowerments, Kalachakra empowerments given by the Panchen Lama in particular, the previous Panchen Lama, actually 2 Panchen Lamas ago, I think it was. And one of Vesna's students has worked on this, on the way that giving that the Kalachakra, I think it was in Beijing, but I think it's also been given in Inner Mongolia and other places. And the function it served to kind of bring all those who practice Tibetan Buddhism, who were Tibetan, but also Mongolian, Manchu, and Chinese together into this kind of common space. So I don't know, Vesna, if you remember enough of Dagena's work to comment on that, but I remember that it was that in her dissertation, she said that it was served a quite important function. So Ed asked me to say a little bit about the difference between Sutra and Tantra. I mean, Sutra and Tantra share a lot in common. They're both forms of Buddhism, and they're both forms of Mahayana Buddhism. So this is important because being a form of Mahayana Buddhism, Tantra is supposed to be based, at least in its Tibetan understanding. What Tantra was at the beginning is perhaps a different question, but as it developed within its Tibetan interpretation, it's a form of Mahayana Buddhism, which means that it's based on the ideal of becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. So compassion, a sense of wanting to save suffering sentient beings by becoming Buddhahood in the quickest way possible. So this is one of the it's said to be one of the important features of Tantra, that in Tibetan it's the Nyurlam, it's the quick path to Buddhahood, as opposed to exoteric, ordinary Mahayana, which is said to take 3 countless eons. Tantra promises to those who practice it correctly, Buddhahood in a single lifetime. So this is one of the differences. And the Dalai Lama has said in the past that the reason for this is that whereas in ordinary Mahayana, one practices the virtues, the accumulation of merit, separately from the accumulation of wisdom, the cultivation of wisdom. Tantra is said to bring both of those together through the process of visualization of oneself as the deity. Now, recent studies have shown that visualization was an important part of Mahayana Buddhism as well. And I don't know, Vesna, if you have something to say about that, but in Tantra, in the first of the 2 tantric stages, visualization is kind of the core of the practice. And the idea is to visualize oneself as the deity of that Tantra, in this case of the Kalachakra. And this happens from the very beginning, which points to another unique feature of the Tantra, which is that it requires empowerment or initiation, or sometimes the word is translated consecration. So one needs to be led into the mandala, into the palace of the deity, through a process of visualization and introduced to the deity, who then blesses the initiand in various different ways, and essentially transforms the initiand's ordinary body into the body of the deity. And this then becomes the basis of the practice of the first stage of Tantra, which is called the generation stage. Generation because one is generating oneself, visualizing oneself in the form of the deity. And when that's perfected, then practitioners move on to the final stage of Tantra, which is called the completion or perfection stage, in which the subtle energies in the body are manipulated so as to enter into a state of subtle consciousness that can bring about final Buddhahood. So those are some of the differences, I think.
You know, Vesna, you seem to be, oh, I think you're on mute, Vesna.
On my computer, it looks like in a minute we are out of time, and you had other questions you mentioned. So I don't know whether some of the things we can discuss during question and answer period, or how to proceed.
Well, I think, I think Jose was inviting you to comment on what he had.
No, I am happy, but I also want to respect the schedule that you and Erin have set up. So yes, Jose is right. Difference between, in terms of differences and also continuities between Mahayana and Vajrayana. When I looked for different definitions of Vajrayana in Indic commentarial sources, sometimes they call it Mahamahayana or Sublime Mahayana, Great Mahayana, right? Because different philosophical foundations, doctrinal foundations are shared. And all these commentators emphasize this, that doctrinal and philosophical foundations are common, but where difference is in a method. That method is that sets, in a way, Vajrayana from Mahayana. And as Jose said, both also in Mahayana and Vajrayana, we have many visualizations practices, but in Mahayana, one doesn't identify oneself as a deity. One may bring a deity into one's heart and so on, but it's not yet visualizes this divine pride, generates this divine pride that really very much characteristic of Vajrayana. And visualization practices are extremely important for diverse reasons, not just one. One is developing when visualization of mandala with 722 deities, right? You develop shamatha with no problem if you can do this, if you can create that mental image. But also, according to the Tantra itself, one has to establish the emptiness of that visualized object, and therefore one simultaneously practices vipassana and shamatha, insight and meditative concentration, so that and that what becomes a unique also in tantras, specifically in the Kalachakra tantra, that in Mahayana you have a gradual path. One is practicing shamatha first, developing ability of sustained attention, and then it applies this to the practice of vipassana. Whereas in the tantra, it is done simultaneously to some degree. However, we are told this does not lead to any enlightenment. You can't get, no matter how well you can visualize a mandala and all the deities, you cannot achieve enlightenment through this method, because this is a conceptual method. One has to think of colors, one has to think of shapes, location, right? So in Stanley's Light commentary, they say, oh, it is still localized practice, right? Whereas, therefore, it does not lead directly to awakening. One may develop all kinds of abilities, siddhis, and so on, but at some point in the practice, one has to abandon this kind of practice and then apply these mental abilities and insights that one has developed into this six-phase yoga practice.
Thank you.
If I
Roger,
could- Can I
something
just jump in very quickly with a couple of observations on that? I mean, one is to recall that when His Holiness gave the Kalachakra initiation in Madison, and I can't speak for other ones because that's the only one I've attended, but the initiation, if those of you who've seen the film will notice that it's in terms of seven initiations. These are all initiations that relate to what Jose was calling the generation stage, this stage in which we are empowered to see ourselves as the Buddha that we will someday become. His Holiness did not give the four, well, there's actually three higher and then a really higher initiations that empower us to practice the completion stage, which is the sort of final step before full Buddhahood. And if just one other quick thing, it's maybe slightly too glib a formula, perhaps, but if we're trying to understand the difference between the generation and completion stages of highest yoga tantra, the generation stage seems to me to be a training in changing our way of seeing. And then the completion stage is training in actually changing our way of being. We become a Buddha through the completion stage. And again, the Kalachakra, like all the higher yoga tantra traditions, has this kind of has this yoga built into it. But that's for very advanced phases. And His Holiness did not get into those sorts of matters, at least in the Madison version of the initiation.
Ed, if I can just chime in here, response to this, I remember, and I don't know if my recollection is correct, but in the film, there's this moment in where the wind picks up, and it feels like the tent is almost going to blow down, and there are birds hovering over the throne where His Holiness is teaching. Above the pavilion. And my recollection is that his Holiness stopped for just a second, and his kind of eyes fluttered. And I think he said at that point, I'm not going to give the completion stage initiations. Now, whether that was a decision he had made from the very beginning, or whether he made it in response to the sign of the wind, that I'm not sure. But that's one of the things that I remember most from the initiation in Madison.
Yeah.
And I did ask him afterwards in a I did another interview with him after the actual initiation when he was still in Madison, and we talked about that. He said, "Yeah, the winds came up, and my pecha, my book began to flutter and fly away, and I just took it as a sign that this was not the time
Okay.
to move into the." And it's also to remembering this is the first time that he ever done Kalachakra outside of of an indigenous environment. This is like a big test case of how do you introduce Tantra, especially Kalachakra, so complex, into a Western sort of cultural environment. And so maybe you could also comment, you guys, about well, I'll just say it, that one of the conundrums was how explicit should we make Kalachakra and Vishnamata, right? The male and the female who are clasped together, which could be interpreted to be a sexual act, but they were worried, or it could be of a unity of male and female, that the male and the female are both required and necessary for fulfilling the path, and the female being wisdom and the male being compassion and being the way of the action. And so that was actually something that people were thinking about. They were worried about it because they didn't want to think, the people who lived around there to think that this was some sort of weird sex cult that was coming into, but it was so much higher. So there were all these considerations to be taken into account. First time it had ever been done in the West. What would the imagery mean to people who were looking at it the first time and stuff like that? And which kind of brings us now into the realm of the deities. Who are the deities? And when we look at Kalachakra, Vishnamata, and we use the term deity, maybe, Vesna, you could get us started on that. What is a deity? And what is it that we're trying to become the deity or becoming Kalachakra, Vishnamata?
Well, first of all, according to the Tantra itself and other Tantras, you can't even go to this practice if you don't have some understanding of emptiness. If you think this is how the deity is somehow inherently existent or looks this way and so on. But rather think of it as otherwise one is not better than a mentally sick person who thinks they are Jesus and walk around the street and shout. So by establishing the emptiness of oneself and the deity, then only then one can think of this, but or practice it. But also that these are symbolic representations of the Buddha's mind, of enlightened awareness, which consists of this non-duality of wisdom and compassion. And Vishwamata is a perfection of wisdom. And Kalachakra is a method, right? But then there are many levels of meaning even of that word Kalachakra. So it really represents non-duality of wisdom and compassion, but also of bliss and emptiness. So union, this union represents blissfulness of Buddha's mind. And this kind of, you said it's very important to, does one need these sexual practices in order along the path? Not necessary. Not necessary. This is for lower, say, practitioners who still are not very good in yoga, and but not at the end. One has to overcome it and even go beyond it, right? So that it is not absolutely necessary for achieving enlightenment in that form to engage in sexual practices.
Well, it's interesting that maybe Jose, you could bring it up. As Vesna has said, and Roger has implied, there was you needed to have some preparation before going into doing a Kalachakra if you're able to receive the whole initiation. So within the Gelugpa order, at least, what would have been required for a monk or a nun to do the tantric practices in terms of their preliminary education, emptiness, compassion, all the terms that Vesna is introducing now? What would have been necessary, Jose?
I mean, I think that there's the ideal, and then there's the reality. The ideal is that I mean, Tsongkhapa, for example, identifies three things as being indispensable to the practice of Tantra, and those he calls the three principal aspects of the path, which are renunciation, compassion or bodhicitta, and the correct view of emptiness and understanding of emptiness. So without that, without some kind of understanding that the world is suffering and an abhorrence of the suffering, that sentient beings are suffering and that we need to help them, and that we at a very fundamental level misperceive reality and we need to correct that. Without that, then the practice of Tantra kind of doesn't make sense. I know we're running out of time for
we're doing fine.
as talking heads, but one of the things that Vesna mentioned, which is, you know, sexual yoga, you asked about this too. I think probably in India, in the early forms of Tantra, sexual yoga was widely practiced, and it was also part of the actual initiation, so that it wasn't simply a question of visualizing that you had a consort and exchanging bodily fluids and so forth, which happened as part of the initiation through the process of visualization, but that this was actually happening during real empowerments or initiations in early Tantra. I think Vesna is right that over the course of time, this came to be seen as a kind of lower form of practice, and even among some of the siddhas, which is a later tradition of Buddhism. I remember this quote, and I can't remember who it was, maybe Virupa or someone, that characterizes the practice of sexual yoga as kind of sitting on one's doorstep and hoping that someone is going to come and tell you titillating pornographic stories. In other words, it's a kind of very coarse understanding of the practice of Tantra. And that really it's possible to make contact with the subtlemost mind through other means. But I think even the Tibetan tradition itself today says that the practice of sexual yoga is appropriate in the second stage, in the completion stage of Tantra.
This is a big topic in and of itself.
Can I just add one thing?
Please.
And we should probably I see there's a lot of audience questions, so we should leave some time for them. But yeah, I mean, I would second everything that Vesna and Jose has said. But one way that's useful to think about Tantra is that, you know, on the surface, it has this appearance of being kind of countercultural or antinomian, or transgressive is a word that people use often. And as Jose suggests, certainly historically in India, there were sexual practices of some sort, and Tantra was at some levels involved with what nowadays might be called magic, but that at least in the ideal form of things, to actually practice Tantra properly, you're engaging with the psyche at a very deep level. And in that sense, you actually need to be more renounced than, say, an ordinary monk in the Theravada tradition or a Mahayana tradition. You have to be more compassionate than most bodhisattvas, and you have to have a deeper insight into emptiness. So those three principal aspects that Jose talked about, you have to, again, this is ideally speaking, you have to have those to a much greater degree than ordinary practitioners, precisely because you're getting into something very complicated, very psychologically, if you will, tricky. It's so easy. Tantra is liable to abuse and misunderstanding. And so you've got to really have that stuff together again, ideally, if you're going to be a practitioner.
Well, a lot of that aims at the kind of preparation that's required for doing it.
Yeah.
It's not something people often talk about the Kalachakra and Tantra as visualizing and of using the use of the imagination. But oftentimes that is not without the preparation. So just because you can imagine something doesn't necessarily you're going to become it, but that imagination is, say, a just a way of one of the ways in which you approach it, but it's not sufficient in and of itself because you're not really trained yet to be able to do that imagination in a proper way. So it's a yes.
This is almost very strictly prescribed meditation. It's not just, oh, I can go and visualize any way I like. These are prescribed. And in addition to, otherwise they become a child's play. Like I can visualize anything I like and it just becomes another level of delusion. So this is very strictly prescribed, step by step, what one visualizes. Then it is designed in such a way then to lead you to some development, mental development. Otherwise, it's just useless.
Yeah, thank you, Vesna. So what do you think? Should we look at some questions and see what's
Yes.
Yeah, if I may, Ed, there is a question about visualization. I think this would kind of segue nice into. So, a question from Andrew. Thank you so much for the film and your contributions to this topic. Technology has provided both a threat and an opportunity for our mental health. There were some important visualizations in the movie. Do you think that a multimedia supplement using technology like VR would help attendees past and present to further explore the Kalachakra and better internalize the visualization?
I'm trying to understand the question. Does anybody feel like they get a handle on this?
Well, I think the question is in reference to the graphics, the computer graphics that were used in the film, and whether or not, even outside of the film, that this can be used as an aid to, for example, doing visualizations.
Okay. So the fact that you're referring because we put a tremendous amount of effort into doing the animation of the three-dimensional mandala and the deities. That there are certain deities in addition to Kalachakra, Vishwamata, those two, but then there would be a number of somewhere between 2 and 5 deities, for each of the 7 steps of the initiation. And so a wonderful artist and animator, Pema did this in Namgyal. I know he's a very close friend, and now my 80 years on the planet is causing me to even forget the names of my children. Anyway, it'll pop up here. An incredible artist, a great Tanka painter, and so he did that probably for the first time ever in a film. So that we are showing to give people a sense of what the deities would look like if you were to visualize them. So it's a way to sort of introduce the idea, the possibility of that kind of visualization. But as you'll notice in the film itself, we didn't go into a lot of detail on it because that would be another film. It would be another lifetime worth of education. So we wanted to show just an example of what an imaginal experience would be of the deities.
Yeah, the questioner also asked about VR, which I take to be virtual reality, and that would be a whole other level of imagination, if you will, if one could put on I suppose one would imagine receiving the initiation and then putting on a VR helmet or whatever one does. I've never done it myself, probably missing out, but then having a program in which the practice would be what you go through in a virtual reality sense. And I mean, of course, there are all sorts of constraints in principle on initiations and who can practice what after initiation. So you wouldn't want this exactly out there on the market, I wouldn't think. But it raises other interesting possibilities for how technology could extend beyond what it was in 1981.
Yeah.
I
And by the
think
way,
that
payment, let me just, before I forget it again, Pema Namdro Taye. My dear friend and this very incredibly talented artist who did the animation for the film. Thank you, Pema Namdro Taye. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, Vesna.
No, sorry, I should have raised my head. Even if you look in different tantric practices at the beginning, actually one display on an altar images that one is going to visualize. So there are little props at the beginning. So you see this visual image that you can then copy in your mind. So I think with this technology, maybe it could be useful at the beginning, but I think at the end, it's not useful at all, in the sense that when you are creating something with your own mind, that you are developing these powers of concentration and shamatha, whereas when if somebody just leads you by hand, they are doing work for you. I don't see how mind can be really developed in concentration if you are just, following along something that somebody else has already created. That could be a trap.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you
Point
get
that
into
you are minute, you yourself with your own mind, and you are maintaining it rather than just traveling along some images, that you are not developing really great power of concentration. Your mind is not being trained in a way if you are creating yourself those images. So I think it could be useful to point, but then can be actually harmful or not giving any benefits.
yeah. Especially when you get into the more internal yogic practices in the higher
Yeah,
stage, it's very hard to see
exactly.
how that would work. Yeah, I think your point's a really good one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question here. I did the Kalachakra in 1989 in Los Angeles, California. We were told that although one may not understand well what it was about in detail, one would form a mental imprint and a karmic connection that could lead to a rebirth in Shambhala in a future reincarnation. Can someone please comment more about this?
Jose, do you want to take this one? You set out the last one.
I think this is a Vesna question, but I mean, it's often said that, I mean, any teaching creates imprints that is karma, if you will, that will ripen in the future in some particular way, positive way, but it also creates connection, a karmic connection to the teacher, in this case, the Dalai Lama, who is being visualized as the deity Kalachakra throughout the initiation. And the connection there, therefore, to Shambhala is obvious. But Vesna, I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, I think you kind of secondly answered it. Not only that one visualizes His Holiness Dalai Lama as a deity and creates connection with him, that he himself visualizes himself as a deity.
Right.
So you meet on a certain level that is, or creating this imprint that is slowly, or the first step to elimination of these old habitual propensities of thinking, looking at your teacher, looking at yourself in the course of meditation, when visualizing entering mandala as a deity, so that some imprints are already created, even those that may be small or small in the sense that one doesn't see them, right? Doesn't feel them, that there is something there in the mind that may bring to fruition in the course of later practice.
Yeah, and I would just add that in terms of Shambhala,
Yeah.
That, as Vesna mentioned earlier, that's the sort of this semi-mysterious land where the Kalachakra was preserved between the time the Buddha taught it and the time it was reintroduced to India, if you will. And as I suggested before, there's this sort of political and historical, there's even an eschatological dimension to the Kalachakra and to the whole Shambhala story, which we don't need to get into in detail, but there will come a time when the events will happen, and to be born in Shambhala at that time will be very auspicious and important for spiritual progress and eventually for a kind of reestablishment of world peace. So the notion that one might be reborn in Shambhala sometime down the road, centuries down the road, is part of the larger the kind of particular scheme of rebirth imagined in the Kalachakra system.
I think Vesna also in the film has said something like that one is going to be visualizing, meditating, doing the initiation for the purpose of being reborn, or to be reborn oneself into Kalachakra Vishwamata. Does that you remember having said that?
Yes, the whole practice begins with a very detailed description of how one is visualizing elements of one's body, ordinary body, being dissolving, following the exact process that's happening at the time of actual death. That there is a certain sequence in which elements in the body are becoming dissolved, so that one is like this, imaginatively dying to everything that one has been grasping onto as my body, my mind, my name, everything like this, right? In order to be born into this palace of nirvana, into this emptiness and compassion. But now and then starts a new perspective of oneself as a deity, but also looking at others as being those deities of the mandala, not just, oh, I am special, I am deity, and others are still those bosses, ignorant, right? But at the same time, looking out at the world and one's environment as the palace of nirvana, as this body of the Buddha, this blissful, empty body of this enlightened awareness, that we are already dwelling in it, and that the whole process, even in this stage of generation, is not just visualizing a mandala, but even when one, in between sessions, that one is looking at the world as being this manifestation of enlightened awareness. And then how Shambhala plays in it, only in a sense that Shambhala can be physical place, but can be also pure land, according to different commentarial literature, or can be state of a mind. So when you look at the certain practices for the rebirth in Shambhala, it's not a physical place at all. It becomes eventually a completely mental state, the state of enlightenment. So there are different even ways and symbolic meaning of what Shambhala is. And it depends on one's own development and perceptions that one develops over the past.
Beautifully put. Thank you so much, Vesna. Aaron, you got another one coming up?
Yeah, we are at 12, but we can ask another question kind of to end us out here. How does the beautifully nuanced Kalachakra ritual translate to merging of the universal life force with one's embodiment of daily life force, our experiential temple?
That's such an easy question. So, no, it's a beautiful question. Thank you so much. Jose, do you want to lead off on this? So it
Well,
seems like
after the initiation, one takes certain commitments. One takes actually certain vows. As part of the initiation, one takes the vows, bodhisattva vows. One takes tantric vows, which are in the Kalachakra system are phrased slightly different than in other systems. And then one makes a commitment to a practice, a daily practice of performing what's known as the 6-session yoga, 6 things that you're supposed to visualize or you're supposed to repeat 6 times a day. And this form is, in the ideal case, it's supposed to be the basis of a practice that includes sustained periods of meditation on visualizing oneself as the deity and the repetition of the mantra to begin slowly to cultivate the sense that one actually is the deity, which is the basis of this first stage, which is called the generation stage. So I'm not sure if this is getting at the question, but it is, the initiation gives one the permission to engage in these types of practices and commits one to seeing the world and to acting in the world in specific ways.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I would add that one of the key features of tantric systems, wherever we find them, not just Buddhist but Hindu, there's Jain tantric systems as well. There's South Asian, Tibetan, East Asian. Is the focus in many ways on the body. Many South Asian and other Asian and other world religious traditions have a tendency to be suspicious of, to reject the body, to see it as a source of all sorts of troubles and temptations and everything else. And in tantric traditions, the body is kind of consecrated, almost in a literal sense, in that your body, as you see it, not just sitting on a meditation cushion, but if you're capable of it, as you're walking around in the world, your body is the sacred body of the Buddha that someday you will actually attain. Some people have described these processes as kind of like a dress rehearsal for enlightenment, and that's you're enacting your own future enlightenment, including the transformation of your body from an ordinary body into the body of a Buddha.
Beautiful. So Aaron, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, we are at time, so I think thank you all for all of your wonderful questions. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to get to them all, but Ed, if there's anything you want to share to close us out, please feel free, or if anybody has any other final thoughts.
I just want to thank Ed for the film.
Yes,
Yeah.
I second that.
The thanks for the film has just been given. The fact that it means something to you means everything to me. And that we were able to fulfill Geshe Sopa and the Dalai Lama's wish that first historic Kalachakra outside of Asia be documented and be seen as the historical event that it actually was. And so we're fulfilling, just by doing what we're doing right now, we're fulfilling that wish that the Dalai Lama and Geshe Sopa had. And the film just becomes a vehicle for helping to sustain that. So I'm really grateful to Tricycle for picking up on it and for recognizing it and putting it in the festival. It's very meaningful. Thank you so much for all you're doing, and thanks to everybody who've tuned in to listen in and to ask questions and to be with us. We're joined in this journey together, toward the journey toward enlightenment, the journey towards peace, the journey towards compassion together. That's why we're all here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed,
Thank you,
Jose,
Eddie.
Vesna, Roger. And thank you, Ed, for making the film available to us for the festival. As a reminder to our audience members, if you'd like to watch the event again, we'll be sending it out in a replay, in a follow-up email. So we hope you're enjoying the festival. Please write to us at feedback@tricycle.org to let us know thoughts and suggestions. And just a reminder, you do have until March 27th to watch the rest of the films, or if you want to revisit this film. And if you would like more Buddhist films, we do also have monthly film offerings for our subscribers at our film club, which you can find at tricycle.org/film club. And just a final note here that Tricycle is a nonprofit. So if you'd like to make a donation, you can visit tricycle.org/donate. We also hold similar events monthly for our premium subscribers. So if you're not already, visit tricycle.org/subscribe to become a premium subscriber, or you can write to us at support@tricycle.org. So thanks again, everyone, all our panelists and Ed for moderating. And yeah, I hope to see you all again very soon.
Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks so much.